Please note that the content of this podcast reflects the personal opinions and experiences of the speakers. It should not be considered medical advice. For professional guidance, consult with a relevant expert. SIA has no affiliation to any commercial entities spoken about or highlighted as part of the content of this podcast series. SIA is not in a position to endorse or recommend individual products or entities. Participants' views are based entirely on their own experiences and they are speaking as separate entities. Hello everyone and welcome back to our limited series podcast on travelling with confidence. My name is Ollie Thorne and I'm excited to be joined by an acclaimed group of guests on podcast 3 as we dive into everyday travel. You've probably noticed on our initial conversations in the first 2 podcasts, we've spoken a lot about travelling abroad. Well, today we're going to be looking a bit closer to home and the travel we all take every day. Today, we're going to be exploring experiences on public transport and driving, how we use it, and how it can be made easier. We're also going to touch on some wider accessibility campaigning for change, which is some of the work that is being done by SIA. As you'll likely remember, I'm a T5 complete paraplegic and I use a manual chair. I drive and I have a fair bit of experience commuting to work using trains, but I'm not quite sure why I still have a bit of fear of using buses. Probably because I've not got much experience of using them at all. Luckily, our guests have a really broad range of experience today. So that's enough about me and let's get the conversation started. And I'm going to be coming to Andy first. Would you be able to give everyone a quick introduction, who you are and your favourite place you've travelled to?
Yes, Ollie, great to be here and thank you very much for inviting me along. My name's Andy, as you say. I've got a T3 complete spinal cord injury, so full-time manual chair user. Travel for me, it's about opening up the world, but also for commuting to work and needing to do what you need to do. And I think for me, favourite place I travel, and my girlfriend would probably kill me if I don't mention this, is Spain, because she lives in Spain. So I travel down there kind of every other month usually, and do quite a lot of travel around Spain, by plane, by train and by coach as well. So I love travelling around Spain.
Yeah, thanks for that, Andy. And Glyn, I'm going to come to you next. Would you be able to give everyone a quick introduction, who you are and your favourite place you've travelled to?
Thanks, Ollie. Yeah, my name's Glyn. I'm from Spinal Injuries Association. And I guess my favourite place of travel to would be Prague. It's a beautiful city. Cobbled, can be tricky, but it's definitely doable. Just needed to plan ahead and sort of work out what you needed to do. I'm a T5 spinal injured full-time wheelchair user. So yeah, it's fantastic.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Glyn. I certainly get the fear about cobbles, like that rattling around and bumping around everywhere. So I'd love to kind of explore Prague maybe a bit later on. Lady Marie, I'm going to come to you next. Would you be able to give everyone a quick introduction, who you are and your favourite place you've travelled to?
Right. My name is Lady Marie Dawson Malcolm, and I'm the partnerships coordinator in the investment and partnership team at SIA. And I love public transport. That's my go-to, whether plane, trains, or automobiles. And my favorite place I've traveled to, although challenging, was Jamaica. I have a C5 complete spinal cord injury, and I am a power wheelchair user.
Awesome. Thanks, Lady Marie. And last but not least, Victoria, would you be able to give everyone a quick introduction, who you are and your favourite place you've travelled to?
Hi everyone, I'm Victoria Garcia. I'm the Accessibility and Communities Manager at Brighton Hove Buses and Metro Bus. I love travelling. I actually had a head injury back in 2010 and I get regular seizures, so I can't drive. So I rely on the bus, the train, travelling by plane, public transport, cycling, walking. I love travelling, and in fact I lived in the south of Spain for a very long time, beautiful place to go to, but actually I love travelling to the Lake District, and we've got some beautiful coastline down on the south of England as well, so really good bus ride along the south, very beautiful.
We do. I think we often forget how beautiful the UK really is and actually how many places there are to explore. It's an awesome place. I'm actually going to Wales this weekend, which I'm excited for. Lady Marie, you mentioned about, I suppose, your love of public transport and, well, all things transport. What's your preferred mode of public transport and why?
My preferred mode is always the fastest. So it's mainline trains. For me, wherever I need to go, first thing I think, Google Maps. What's the fastest way? I cannot tolerate having to hang around. And because living in London, I know that I can access the train very easily. Coupled with that, I do have free travel around London on all modes of transport apart from taxis. And so I always know that I can just turn up and go and get on the trains.
Love that. And you've obviously built up a lot of experience, right? And you mentioned Google Maps, I suppose, being a tool that you use when you're first thinking about where you're going to travel. But just thinking about kind of your experience of trains, and I appreciate you built up that real repertoire of experience. What steps would you take to prepare for train journeys? What is it that you think about? You mentioned Google Maps. What other things might you use, and what would you think about?
Well, when I have to go anywhere, first thing I think about, okay, I would put into Google Map where I'm going, how long will it take me? And so I look at that and then I say, okay, I need to get from, say, A to B. And I would think, okay, my nearest station is wheelchair accessible, so it's got a lift. One thing that I've done over the years is actually ask the station for a telephone number so I can call them to double check if the lifts are working, because sometimes they break down. And so they tell me that, right, the lifts are working. I'll say to them, okay, I will be getting a particular train at this particular time. Please be ready with the ramp. Sometimes I don't do that because I know that it's acceptable, so I just turn up. But when I get there, they would be waiting. They would then call ahead. If that is not possible, sometimes I would use the passenger assistance app to book the train that I want to travel. And I would put in there what support I will need. So I need a ramp, whether I need a companion seat for a carer that I need to take with me. And all of that will be put in the app. So when I get to the station, everything is already ready.
Okay, brilliant. And traveling in a power chair, like how have you found using the ramps to kind of get on and off the train?
Oh, that's no problem at all, because the ramps are built for my wheelchair is less than 300 kg, which is what they said to us, was make sure that our wheelchairs are not too heavy. So including my weight and the weight of the chair, it's less than 300 kg. So I'm able to access the ramp easily.
Okay, brilliant. So I suppose it's the looking ahead, it's a bit of planning, deciding whether you've kind of got experience of that journey before, and then from there deciding whether you're going to be contacting the station staff or support around that network to then make a decision of how you're planning. So quite flexible, I suppose, on each journey.
Yes, but sometimes there are stations that I'm going to go to for the first time. I have no idea of what the station setup is like. I mean, I've been on trains where when the train arrived at the station, where the accessible door is, there's a massive post in the way. And for them to then put the ramp down for me to get off is a challenge. I've had trains that I've had to reverse back in order for the ramp to be deployed so that I can actually get off the train.
But good to know they can do that.
Yes, but it's all about communication, ensuring that you communicate whatever need I have.
And I've got to ask Lady Marie, probably because I'm slightly jealous because I don't live in London. And whenever I go to London, I have to pay for transport. So how are you getting that free transport around London?
We've got a local authority coupled with the London Council do provide disabled people with a freedom pass. So that gives us free travel anywhere within the M25. On the buses, the underground, the mainline trains, that path also entitles us to free travel on all the buses around the UK.
Wow, love that. If anyone's living inside London, check it out and see if you're eligible. And I suppose, Andy, I'm going to come to you next. We've been out around London a few times, exploring, pushing around just the streets more generally, or we've jumped on a couple of buses together and trains. And you've always impressed me with your confidence and your wheelchair skills, which can sometimes definitely help with that. Do you have a favourite mode of transport?
Good question, Ollie. And I think, very much like Lady Marie, I think particularly around London, like the Freedom Pass and everything like that. Public transport is definitely my go-to. And for me as well, public transport, it gets you out and about and burning a few calories as well. And you don't have to worry about trying to find a disabled parking bay. For me, again, using that public transport, I again would go straight to Google and Google the quickest route. You can actually select some of your preferences as well, which will store in your phone if you need level access and stuff like that, which I generally leave on. But I think I use that in conjunction with the TfL tube map to basically look at roughly where the accessible stations are. As you say, Ollie, I don't worry too much about some of the access at some of the stations, because wheelchair skills, as you mentioned there, is something that I've been really passionate about over the last 15 years or so, and building up those skills to deal with things that might not be perfect. For instance, fairly early on in my journey, I learned how to drop off a curb, which is a great confidence booster in the instance that you arrive at a station that isn't level access. So I know quite a few people might just jump on a tube and you wouldn't realise that there's a raised part of the platform in places. So you have to access the tube at a particular place to arrive at the right place for the level access. So for me, building up those skills means that that's something that I don't have to worry about. And I think having that confidence to get out there and not have to worry about that side of things really gives me confidence to get out there as well. The other thing as well is being able to go up and down escalators in a wheelchair. That's something I learned over the years through necessity at points. 15 years ago, there weren't as many accessible tube stations as there are now. I learned how to go up and down escalators, and that again has been a great fallback for when, either as Lady Marie mentioned, lifts are out of order, or that you've got a station that only has escalators, in which case I'm quite happy to go to those kind of stations and just use the escalators again, because it potentially is going to save you a half hour or even longer round trip to get round that obstacle.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I think those wheelchair skills, whether you're in a manual chair or a power chair, right, is so important to really give you that opportunity to get out and make memories. On the commute to work for myself, I have to jump in the car for a couple of minutes to drive down to the local station and do a little bit of a push up over the platform to the other side. And because it's a really small station and there's no one ever there in the morning, I've actually kind of used that back wheel balance aspect to actually get onto the train. So I'll be able to back wheel balance up to the door and then I can kind of pull myself on, which, like you say, it does give you a opportunity to access travel in different ways, but fully appreciate it really depends on what you're comfortable doing.
It's that confidence to put yourself out there and start trying it, really.
It is. It's going outside of that comfort zone, which, to be honest, I haven't been that great with buses. Glyn, can I come to you? What's your preferred mode of transport?
I guess straight away it was the car. So I had an injury in 2017. That's how long I've been in my chair. And driving was sort of my go-to mode for everything I had. In my local town, there was no taxis I could take. I was a bus engineer, so I did know buses inside and out. And I took a few, but I just found the car was the easiest mode of travel to use. As times rolled on, I've now actually taken a bit more to public transport where I can, where it's easier. So I do a lot of work in Westminster, and I was driving because there's quite a lot of disabled based parking around Westminster. So I was driving in and out, but it was taking a long time. So I decided, you know what, I'm just going to do public transport. And for me, it was quite nervy. The first time you do it, you're on your own. But I got hold from a local station. They said, yeah, we're accessible. We're 24-hour service. You can book or turn up. So I chose being quite lazy, I guess. I chose just turning up, hoping on the day, but I just turned up. I had my route planned. So I knew I had to get to Blackfriars, get off at Blackfriars. I could get on the Circle line and I could make my journey through off the underground that way. And I just asked the station staff every time I went somewhere. I was like, where do I go? How do I get on? And it's stuff like on the tubes, you realise, it was touched on earlier, that there's only certain places you can get on. On the certain tube carriages, they've got the disabled stickers, so there's usually two. And you just look out for that disabled sticker and you know that's the one you're going to get on. But for me, it was scary, I guess, the first couple of times. After that, you do get a lot more confidence, like you're coming through from Lady Marie and Andy. You just get more confident about it, don't really worry too much. Nowadays, I don't tend to let staff know where I am, where I'm going. But at the beginning, just to give you that sort of boost, it's kind of nice to know that if anything goes wrong, they know you're around. You're going to be in that carriage or getting off or should be getting off. And they are usually there to meet you as well. The one thing I'd say is I travelled up to York for work. So that's going in the opposite direction. I didn't want to drive. Where I was going was right next to the station. So I thought that'd be easy. Just get on a train, off we go. On that day, the train I was supposed to change at Stevenage, I live in Winter Garden City, I was supposed to go to Stevenage, change there. I could get on the LNER all the way up to York. However, there was trouble in the morning. The train I wanted was let to go past me, so I missed that one. All of a sudden, it's like plans change. You have to work out, now what do I do? But the station staff are there on hand, and they sorted it all out. They said, we'll get you on, you'll change a little bit further up at Peterborough. And it all worked out until I got to York. And when I got to York, there was nobody there to meet me. And everyone sort of heard these horror stories. Nobody there to meet you, the door's open, what do you do? And for me, it was just about keeping that door open. As long as I kept that door open, I had my chair rolled quite near to the edge and I just had my finger on the button. And people are generally quite helpful. And they went and got staff, and I was let off within a few minutes. But it can be a bit wary when you turn up to that door. It's happened a few times since, where you just turn up and there's nobody there. And it's like, I'm stuck. But the reality is you just got to be confident enough to say, I'm not stuck. As long as them doors don't shut, I'm not stuck, because somebody will come, because the train can't move. You just got to bear that kind of information in mind and just keep calm, and it will all work out in the end.
And it's that feeling sometimes of not wanting to be difficult, not wanting to be awkward, and I suppose not wanting to be a burden or have that feeling of lack of dignity sometimes in some of those situations, which can make us want to avoid those situations. But actually, as you've said, well, as everyone said, it's building up that toolbox of experience, and also knowing the power of the kindness of strangers sometimes as well, that people will really, really help out and support. So, Lady Marie, I'm going to come to you for a little support for me, really. I talk about my fear of, I suppose, going on buses and stuff like that. And I would love to hear about your experience of using buses being a Londoner.
Wow. I remember the first time I actually was at the bus stop and a bus came by. I think it was about 20 years ago, and I didn't realize that they had ramps. And I just said to the driver, "Oh, can I get on the bus?" And then he pressed the button and the ramp came out, and I was like, "Really? Wow, they've got ramps. I can get on the bus." And then after that, I was out there trying all the buses. The ramps weren't as good as they are now, and I've had a few mishaps, but it didn't stop me, because I thought, I am going to push through all of this, because what I do whenever I come across any challenges, I treat it as an adventure. That's my way of learning how to access things. So I've used buses now for years. They're so easy, but sometimes I get on the bus and then when it's time to come off, the ramps won't come out. And then it's a case of all the passengers are looking at you and tutting, and I'm like, well, it's not my fault. They should make sure that the ramps are working. So then you find that drivers have to get off the bus, passengers help them to lift me off onto the platform. And then, of course, all the passengers have to get off because the ramp's broken. So they have to get off to get another bus. But apart from that, when it does work, it's seamless. I would say 9 times out of 10, it worked perfectly fine.
That's good to hear, because I suppose it goes back to that, I suppose, that dignity piece again, doesn't it? So I think sometimes where maybe you are stuck on a bus, and especially if everyone then has to get off the bus because something's broken on the bus that doesn't necessarily affect them, right? Although it's not your fault, there's a weight that comes with that, right?
First time it happened, you may feel a bit embarrassed because everyone's looking at you. But after that, it's a case of, well, hey, just suck it up. What can you do?
Yeah, exactly. And I think, it's also a good time to just remember, like, the reason why you're doing it, right? I think we want to make memories, we want to experience life, and a huge part of that is getting out and exploring. As I mentioned, we live in a beautiful country, and the only way we do that sometimes is that willingness to step into a bit of the unknown and the potentially uncomfortable. But it's knowing that it doesn't happen the majority of the time. But also, I'm going to come to Victoria now, because I think it's also really great to know that there are companies that are genuinely trying to improve this situation, right? To make it better. Victoria, you work for a bus company, and they're doing a load of work to really improve this situation.
Oh, absolutely. It comes back to the social model and the medical model, that the barriers that are faced are the fact of it's down to us to actually ensure that people can access the transport. We want people to use the bus. We need to make sure people can use the bus. And there's several things that we've done. But going back to what Lady Marie was saying about the ramps, that's an awful situation to be in. And sometimes, as we all know, the ramps can fail just as they're coming out and they hit the curb. We've actually gone back to manual ramps for many reasons, but one of them being is that the driver will get out the cab and deploy the manual ramp. But that also means that there isn't a failure, but it also means you've got that if there's any extra assistance or help that the person would like to have, then the driver's there. But it's really about ensuring that making services more accessible, and through co-design, through co-production, because it's got to be about the lived experiences of disabled people, actually ensuring, and if the service works for disabled people, it works for non-disabled people as well. And so it works for everyone, so it's for everyone's benefit. But it's absolutely vital, and there's lots of different things that we can do to do that.
Yeah, I love that. And I suppose there's a slight little plug, which is why you were referring to some great scenic views on the south coast. It's been Brighton Bus Company that's really leading the way on this conversation, right? And also evidencing to other companies that, like, the real kind of successes that can come from it.
Oh, absolutely. I was actually the first accessibility lead in bus in the UK, because you normally have a me on the trains, but not on the bus, which is now, after all these years, it just seems very unusual not to have that. And I came into the industry because I'm disabled myself. I had a traumatic head injury, which is why I can't drive. I have all the things around the confidence of travelling that I have to ensure that my journey's planned out. And there's lots of different things like apps and things that I rely on as well. We've actually found at the bus company, because I started within customer services and went into the role because we were finding a lot of our feedback was from around customers around accessibility. And so by investing in it, not only have we made the service better for our passengers, it's actually better for the company. We carry more passengers outside of London than any other operator in the UK. And one of those reasons is because we're more accessible. So it's better for passengers and it's better for business. And it works. And it's only through the co-design and the co-production with users that we've been able to do that.
I love that, and it's really nice to hear that change is being made, right? It's so important. And I will come to Glyn in a bit further down the conversation around also some of the work that you're doing, Glyn, to campaign for wider change. But just thinking, whilst we're speaking about different modes of transport, I think one that is glaring in the face that we haven't really chatted about is using your chair to get that final bit, or whether you do have an incomplete injury and you're kind of walking. And I suppose it's having that confidence and mobility to use different skills and also different bits of kit. I use it's called an RGK F35 electric bit on the front of my chair, which makes a massive difference around London with all of the different curb heights, different cracks in pavements, just to lift your casters off. And it also means that if I turn up to a meeting, I'm not necessarily really sweaty, red-faced. I can look a bit more kept for meetings, which is helpful. And Andy, would love to come to you because I know you're incredibly experienced, like wheelchair skills and flying around London a lot. Are there any tips and tricks that you'd give people for building that confidence of taking that last bit of the travel, I suppose?
Yeah, I think, we've touched upon it a bit already. I think it's about starting small with your journeys. And when you're building up that confidence, it's not about throwing yourself into something that's going to be really challenging. And obviously use the resources that you've got out there. We've mentioned Google. You can also look at distances to push and stuff like that. But one thing that I find personally quite useful is thinking about the terrain a little bit as well. Because I'll tend to, if I know it's largely downhill, I'm more happy to push than if it's more uphill. And in which case I might look at taking a bus instead. So I think looking at that topography can help you a little bit. And again, just building up your own skill level so you're confident getting around and knowing what to do in different scenarios.
And Glyn, you mentioned at the beginning going around Prague and the cobbles and the challenges that came from that. How was that?
So I had a front wheel attachment, but I had free wheel. So just a manual clip-on, just lifted up so I could just push myself around. And that basically is what helped. It's kind of great in the city centre where you can push around and there's no cars. But once you come slightly out and you've got cars, you're on very narrow pathways. A lot of the time you feel like you're in the way of other people. A lot of it's borne down, I think, to the fact that we're now a lot shorter than we were before, and we're generally a little bit wider. Just because of the shape of the chair and how we're sitting down. And it gives you that everyone's sort of peering over you, feel crowded. But everyone's nice. And that's what I think we forget, pretty much as disabled people. We actually forget that 9 times out of 10, people are really nice. And they will get out of your way and they'll stop and let you pass. And you just have to accept sometimes that that's their way of actually making you feel a bit more included and helping you get around, rather than them feeling pity on you or anything. It's just them helping you to be included in the world. Stuff like going into Prague, though, it sort of veers off of travel, so to speak, but you just got to make sure you plan around where you can go to the toilet and stuff like that, because A lot of these old towns don't have them sort of facilities, so it's planning. So you plan with everything you do. You plan with how you get around. You have to plan what you're going to do, and you have to plan, make sure it's accessible. I didn't see too many buses there, and I didn't take any public transport. In fact, I drove all the way down to Prague when I did a road trip around Europe.
Oh, wow. Yeah, love that. And I think, like you say, that planning is so important to also bring that confidence, especially when we're talking about bladder, bowel issues as well that can potentially happen when you are out. And just made me reflect just briefly when you were discussing there of a great app that I use. It's Blue Badge Parking and has pretty much all the Blue Badge bays across the UK, and an app that I use whenever I am driving anywhere just to find those bays. It's really, really useful. And Lady Marie, we've spoken a bit about those attachments on the front of chairs or different bits of skills. Obviously, that's quite different when you're using a power chair. How do you find that navigating towns?
I have no problem at all. I suppose because I've been injured for such a long time, 33 years, I've been there, done it, tried it. I've even taken on doing mystery shopping on trains. I've used buses in Brighton, Hastings, Milton Keynes, wherever. Well, I use the buses in Spain as well. Navigating around town, because I like new powered chairs that have really large wheels. So I don't have to worry about, for example, going on the underground. My wheels are not going to be caught between the platform and the train. I just go straight on, so I have no problem at all. I think talking about cobbles, the worst I felt was in Westminster because my wheels are solid tires, so they're more bouncy. And I was like, my God, if these cobbles ever going to end, until eventually I managed it. It was not nice.
I suppose I'm just reflecting and I'm just thinking about someone potentially listening to this pod, and we all have a lot of experience of traveling. If actually we reflect back and maybe we have a tip for someone who is taking that first bit of travel, whether it be on a bus, whether it be going down into town driving, what would that tip be? I think for me it was about having a sense of security. So it was having someone with me that I knew on those first few trips that if anything did go wrong, I had someone that I could rely on, a friend that we could come up with a solution. Andy, I don't know if you have any tips thinking back to those kind of early days. What would you say to someone else?
Yeah, I think that's a really good shout, is taking somebody along with you on the journey. But I think like the other thing as well is for me when I first started using the train when I was first injured was that feeling of everybody staring at you and feeling like you were sticking out and everyone was staring at you. I think getting over that is a more general thing when you've had a spinal cord injury. It's about reaching out to some of those organisations who can introduce you to other people who have gone through the experiences that you're going through as well. So maybe meeting up with other people who are out there and living their lives and taking advice from them and hearing their stories and reassuring you that maybe they've gone through that same situation of feeling like everyone's staring at you and wondering what you're doing there. But that'd be my advice.
That's great. And it's that power of community. I think we're in quite an exclusive club. We're talking about spinal cord injury, right? I know that everyone that I certainly know with a spinal cord injury wants to share that advice to make other people's experiences easier. It is reaching out and potentially asking for a bit of support or just advice of how someone else has done it.
Well, when I was a sport coordinator for SIA, my other role before this one, I went to the spinal unit to talk about SIA services and what support we can provide to newly injured people. I always tell them how I actually get to spinal unit by using public transport and how many trains I had to take to get there. And one of the patients that was there having his rehab, he was so impressed that he said, well, if Lady Marie can do it, I'm going to do it. So on the way home, when I was going to get the tube at Stanmore Station, lo and behold, that person that I saw at the spinal unit was getting on the tube, and he said, well, he's going to try it another go, and he did.
I think that can be really powerful, can't it? To lots of newly injured people, they're always interested to find out, how you've got there, whether you've driven or, taken public transport. It brings back normality when you're sort of in that bubble of rehab, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Power of community, isn't it? Yeah.
I think there's a lot on social media and stuff as well now where you can go and follow people who are doing different things and seeing how they're doing as well.
There is, yeah. From Instagram, TikTok, kind of hearing those individual stories, or there are those discussion groups like the SIA Community Support Group, SCI Owners Group on Facebook, amongst many others. There are loads of great resources out there.
Can I also say that TFL has a travel mentoring scheme whereby you can, on a day, book a session with them and someone will go around with you, getting on and off different modes of transport to give you a bit of confidence.
Love that. And that's great to hear. And I hope maybe there's others in different areas of the country if you're not based in London. Glyn, I suppose you mentioned the situation when there wasn't a ramp there and you came up with that solution of tapping the door open button. I'm sure on this call we've all got war stories as such of potentially being caught out, trapped somewhere. I've certainly had it where, very similar to yourself, Glyn, I got into a train station, there wasn't a ramp there and was on there for a while and ended up having to pull the emergency cord. I have to say I've travelled a lot by train and that's only happened once. It was a bit of a freak incident as such. But I know everyone loves to hear those gnarly stories. Although we don't want to scare anyone away, I don't think we should necessarily avoid them in this conversation. So, Glyn, you mentioned that one around the train. I don't know if you have any others that you could potentially share and what you did to overcome it as well.
I'll go with my first ever tube journey, and I went with my dad. We were going to watch Tottenham. I can't remember the station we got on, but this is going back before I was confident enough to travel on my own anyway. Having never been on a train in my chair, at the time, I just assumed you just get on it and it'd be all right. But it was packed with loads of supporters wanting to go and watch the football. I got on and I happened to be facing up or down the carriage. I forget which way. And I guess Andy would probably smile at what he probably realises is going to happen. I got on. I wasn't ushered into a particular space. I wasn't told anything. I was literally just shoved on. I was facing down the carriage. I'm in a reasonably tippy chair. The train moved and I just went backwards without even thinking about it. I'd had no experience, had no idea.
Backwards out the back?
My back, not out the door. The doors were all shut, but backwards as in I was about to fall over.
Yeah.
And fall over backwards. A couple of people grabbed my chair. And again, like I say, I had no experience. I had nothing behind me. It was a packed train. I felt mega embarrassed. But at that point, I guess I just started laughing about it because there's not a lot else you can do. I had a couple of people holding my chair. They were stuck. They were trying to lift me back up because obviously my wheels are rolling. I was like, hang on, I've got to try and put my brakes on. We'll get me back up. And in the end, I manoeuvred around, went sideways, holding onto a rail, and it was all fine. But it was a very clear reminder that you've let your guard down and don't think about how some of these different motions and movements can affect you. And it can go wrong in an instant and you just got to sort of deal with it, I guess. So that was probably my biggest war story about travelling. It's making sure you actually fight to get in where you're supposed to be on a train, because there were people that just stood around where that was.
That was your first journey as well. You've obviously been a glutton for punishment and gone back for more.
Absolutely, yeah. But you learn from your mistakes. I say it was my mistake, I didn't know, but it was also station staff. They should have made sure that I was in and in my proper space as well. They should have actually done that. But it was football day, everyone was crowded, and I guess I was kind of forgotten in the midst of all that. But it is just one to bear in mind. So yeah, that was my first ever experience on the train, so to speak.
Oh, wow. And I think there's always policies in place to try and get people into certain places. But like you say, events change on the day. The train is full of football supporters. You're not necessarily going to be able to get to those certain positions, are you? And you're going to have to go with the flow a little bit. And it is building up a bit of that experience, which you don't have on the first go. So well done for going back for more. And Lady Marie, going to come to you next. So would you be able to share a time when it hasn't gone right using public transport, but then also what you did to overcome it?
I've got so many. I remember I was in North London and I needed to get back to South London. The station that I arrived at to get on the tube, the whole platform was level access onto the tube. And I was told by the staff, just get on the train and you'll be able to get off at the next train station. So I was getting off at Tottenham Court Road. So I wheeled onto the train, parked myself into the tube and everything was going well when I got to Tottenham Court Road, only to realize that in order to get off, I was in the wrong carriage. And it was rush hour. So it was about 5 o'clock in the evening. The train was packed. And when we got to Tottenham Court Road, I looked at it and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's a big drop. I can't get off the tube. And I need to get off. And then I looked at the passengers, they were all standing there, and I said, well, guys, if you want this tube to go, you're going to have to get me off the train. And I refused to go anywhere else. So then some of the guys just got behind my chair and just lifted me up onto the platform. When I got onto the platform, and staff were there, and I said, well, I need to get out, only to realize that the lifts were broken. So I couldn't get out of the station. So I said, all right, then, well, I'll have to get on the tube and get to another station that is wheelchair accessible. And that's what I did in order to be able to get home. But I just took it my stride because it's a case of, well, what can you do?
I think sometimes in those situations, it's very easy to focus on the things that are out of your control. And those are the things that become quite overwhelming. And actually taking a moment, and I know on podcast 2 we were discussing some of the mental resilience pieces and well-being around travel, and actually taking a moment to take stock of a situation, to really look at what is it that's in your control in that particular moment, can really, really help.
I think what we need to realize that who we were prior to our injury, we're still that person who can make decisions and say, okay, if I was on my feet before and I faced a challenge, how would I deal with it? And it's just thinking about solutions.
Definitely, I couldn't agree more. Andy, I'll come to you with some of those experiences.
I don't think I've had any catastrophic disasters on public transport. I think one thing that sticks in the mind, I think, was when I was commuting every day. I was working in a job in Canary Wharf and commuting at peak times on the Jubilee line. It was packed like sardines, and usually you would get on the second or maybe the third tube that turned up at 8:30 in the morning. The thing I remember there is you just became more comfortable with residing in people's armpits or being crushed right up next to people, because generally, as long as I could get on that tube train, sometimes the best place to be was near the door, so that when the door opened at each station, you could just hop out and let people out and then hop back into the carriage at each station. But also just finding the best places to get on the train as well. You learnt by experience, by doing that journey every day, where was the best place on the platform, where was the train quietest, and where was the best place once you got inside the train as well. And as Glyn said, like little tricks about putting on one of your brakes, so that if you haven't got anything to hold on to, or if you just can't get to the dedicated space, just by putting on one of your brakes and sort of controlling the movement of your chair with your other hand, meant that you could move with the train as it jiggled along. That for me was the learning experience, really, Ollie.
Love that. And Victoria, appreciate you're at a bus company, but just wanted to see if you had anything to add to this.
Because of my head injury, if I'm travelling somewhere new, I used to get multiple seizures a day when I first had my head injury. Now I get about 4 or 5 a month, so it's much better controlled. But it does mean that my brain doesn't work as well sometimes for planning as it does at other times. So in November, when I went up to the Bus Expo and I was travelling up to the conference, meeting with other people from across the industry, I'd planned out my journey because I have to make sure that I know exactly where I'm going, what time I'm going, if there is any changes, what may be the possible solutions, what do I need to do if something happens. And I completely missed my train stop and ended up at the next train station because I had an absence attack on the train. And I've ended up at the next train station going to a session actually on accessibility that I really needed to get to. So then, although I'd laid out what if something happens, and I do, I'm now actually doing a whole new plan from a new train station. So yeah, these things do happen, and I think it's about looking at the situation, looking at what can we do to actually allay any fears. And it's that confidence, and people's confidence levels are at different stages, and that's why it's really vital that transport providers are putting supports in place, whether it is more apps, whether it is more support, whether it is ensuring somebody's there to do the ramp, whether it is just even if somebody asks a question, that staff member knows to look at the person in case they're lip reading, to actually listen to what they're saying, write something down. If maybe the person doesn't hear as well, and maybe it's better to write something down, maybe it's not right for the person to write something down because English isn't their first language. What can all of these things that we can do? And I think kindness is one of those things about helping each other and supporting each other, whether that's fellow passengers, fellow travellers, or operators, whether it's train, bus, aviation, maritime, whatever it is, we just all come together. But I think we all, at different times, we all have these things that happen, and it's about working together because it's everyone's journey.
That's great, and thank you so much for sharing that experience. Really, really, really valuable. Glyn, we've discussed some really interesting and amazing personal experiences, and I would love to come to you to get some advice or to hear what you have to share about dealing with inaccessible situations.
First of all, I'd like to say after a period of time of being disabled, you learn to adapt. So every day you leave your house, you come across a curb, you learn to adapt. You either go off it on your back wheel if you can do that. If you can't do that, you find in a place that you can safely cross roads with drop down curbs. Your mind shifts into a problem solving way. That's what you've got to do. So you come across a difficult situation and it's how can I overcome it? That's your mindset. That's what you have to develop. And everyone gets there, just takes time. Everyone's different. So it'll just take a bit of time to get into it. But once you're there, you realize that you're trying to problem solve a problem. And that's the best way to look at it. So you come across taxis, for instance. You're queuing up for a taxi. You can't see an accessible one. You can't find one that's going along. As a manual chair user, can you transfer? Or, okay, you haven't got a slide board if you've got, if that's what you need to transfer into a car, but could you do it with a bit of help? You've seen other people do it. Maybe there's a way it can be done. It's about that sort of problem solving ethos, I guess, is how you sort of getting around it. And that is my biggest bit of advice for people is it will come. It takes time and it takes confidence to do it, but it does come. With the trains, we've already said, make sure you keep the door open. You keep the door open, the train's not going to move. And with buses, bus drivers generally outside of London will come out and help you because most buses outside of London, the driver will deploy a ramp for you. Inside of London, it's a totally different story. I mean, Lady Marie said that the ramp will come out and you'll get on, but the drivers are behind a door and it's their policy of TfL that they don't actually get out of the cab. It's up to you to get yourself in and out. Then you get issues with ramps. That's where it can happen, that the ramp can't deploy. And it can be a difficult situation for you. It can't get on. I've not experienced that on the buses, and I know Victoria's mentioned a lot about buses, and it's not something we've perhaps tapped into a little bit here, but a previous role as a bus engineer, so that's before my injury. I can tell you that ramps, the electric ones especially, do break, more so in the winter due to dirt. But then you've got issues with the fact that TfL being all electrics, they deploy because the cab drivers don't come out. When they sell their buses off to the local bus companies, they're using the electric ramps as well. So you get issues with ramps breaking, you get issues that you're stuck behind and you can't get on and you can feel awkward. But as an engineer, we used to do everything we could. We'd get people off where we could. We'd get people back on, get people on their way. So it's about knowing that everybody out there actually wants to help you. Even if you feel awkward, people generally just want to help. So I'd keep that locked in your mind.
And Victoria, do you have anything to add to that?
It's a really good point, everything that Glyn has said, totally. When a bus is sold from London out to and cascaded to other areas in the UK, there is that issue around the fact of the electric ramp. And in fact, very lucky that at my company, we've got a policy, in fact, we're doing it at the moment to some buses that have come in, that we actually changed the ramp back from electric ramp back to manual ramp. And the other thing that we do, and the issue is for some bus operators, especially if they're smaller ones, it was something funny enough that we were speaking about previously to this, about the cost of retrofitting a bus, which of course Glenn knows a lot about as being a previous engineer. There is a cost in that. And again, I'm very lucky that I work for a bus operator that we're actually doing that, because one of the things that we find that the feedback and the lived experience of some wheelchair users that have used our services is the difficulty manoeuvring around the standing pole in the wheelchair bay, because there's a standing pole that you have in the wheelchair bay, so that when the wheelchair user reverses against the backboard on a bus, there's a standing pole so that as the bus is going around a corner to make it more secure in that area for the wheelchair user. We've co-designed and redesigned, worked with the manufacturers, and we have a pull-down pole, which again our drivers deploy, but of course in London, if they're not getting out the cab, that wouldn't happen. So again, with these buses that we're getting, we're taking out the standing pole and putting in a pull-down pole so the wheelchair user can go straight into the space without having the concern of having to look over their shoulder and reversing in front of everybody. Going back to what was raised earlier about people staring and different things as well. There is something around this, around we need to look at that bigger picture with manufacturers, with engineers, about how we can design buses and trains and all sorts of transport to make them more accessible.
That's great insight. I'm sure actually from your experience, Andy, you've probably got some little bits to add into that conversation.
Yeah, I was just thinking about how we're really fortunate. I think in London, we've got a really good frequency of buses. One of the things that I notice when I take the bus on busy routes is that when you wave at the bus to stop and the bus pulls in, you sort of notice there's a couple of prams and a couple of people standing around where the wheelchair space is. I think sometimes you just think, oh, it's too much hassle to get on this bus. And you say to the driver, I'll just wait for the next one, because you know there's another one coming in 5 minutes and you're quite happy to wait. But I think obviously when you go to smaller cities or places where there isn't that frequency, I think you have to be very vocal to explain that you'd like the driver to ask those people to fold up the prams or make space in that shared area, because sometimes it's not a very big area. So you have to be quite communicative with the driver about, making that space available so that you can get in there.
Thanks for that, Andy. And sometimes it's easy to focus too much on London in these conversations and not think about that wider picture. And Glyn, thank you for sharing some advice around what people can do in inaccessible situations. I'd love to come back to you on that as well, because it's obviously a bit of a passion area for you, and your work with SIA is wrapped up with this as well.
Absolutely. We are launching a campaign for travel, and there's a couple of things we're actually focusing on. For me, I'd love to focus on the whole lot. There's issues with flying, there's issues with trains, buses, taxis, across the board, but the reality is there's only so much you can realistically focus on, and there's a couple of points. And one is train stations. It's getting all stations to be accessible, and that means ensuring that they can either be ramp accessed or level access if possible, and to have lifts installed, because that's pretty much the key things that a lot of the stations are actually missing, is being able to get you from one side to the other and being able to get you on and off. And if they can sort that out, it opens up a whole wide range of travel options for people. There's some places they expect you to be able to ring up and book your travel. I think we need to move on from that in 2025. We need to move on to being able just to turn up and go, and that be the norm, rather than having to book. But it'll take time to get there. The second one that I'd focus on is Hackney Carriage taxis. So they're licensed taxis that you can flag down in the street, not the private hire. But Hackney Carriage taxis, I believe that they should all be accessible. You should be able to flag down a taxi and grab that one, or queue up in a taxi rank and know that when the accessible taxi pulls up, you're 3 people back in the queue and somebody else gets in that taxi, that when you get to the front of the queue, it's going to be another accessible taxi there and not one that you can't get in which case you just got to stand to the side and wait. That's not equality.
Yeah, that's great insight, and great to hear that it's not only private organisations that are working on this, it's also the charities that are really advocating and making that change as well. Lady Marie, do you have any additional reflections on that?
Yes, just thinking that one of the ways that we can affect change and also help to build our confidence in traveling is perhaps getting involved with accessibility panels. For example, I am on the National Built Environment Accessibility Panel at Network Rail. And this is where any projects that are going to do work on the rail infrastructure, such as building new stations or refurbishing old stations to make them more accessible. Advice from people with disabilities can feed into the project to ensure that the station is accessible for everyone. The projects that come to the panel, they have to get advice from us before they can get any funding from the Department for Transport. So I would think that perhaps another way of people with disabilities or wheelchair users being able to access accessible transport in their area wherever they live. Try and get involved in some of these panels. In the local authorities, they do have access associations whereby people with disabilities can sit on these panels and advise them how to make it more accessible so that you can get around.
That's great insight. Thanks, Lady Marie. And where would you find out about how to get involved with these panels?
On the local authority website, you may find that they would have a list of panels and volunteering opportunities whereby they're seeking advice from people with disabilities. And also on social media. For example, when we want to recruit anyone new, we would always put it in the groups. Say, why not get in touch? Put your name forward, get yourself out there, get known, use your networks. This is how it works.
Yeah, and I think by all working together, that's how we make everyone's travel better, right? So it's bringing together everyone's experiences. Thank you very much for that, Lady Marie.
No problem, you're welcome.
So we've discussed around some of those tips and tricks that we all use. I just wanted to come round to everyone and just get everyone to add in some of the apps or different bits of tech or advice they have, just as a bit of a summary. We've mentioned Google Maps. Andy, I don't know if you've got any others?
Yeah, Google Maps, I use that one a lot. Obviously, just the standard London Transport tube map. That's good. It's got the access information there, as does like the TfL journey planner and the TfL website. I think I've used it a bit, which gives you a bit more information about the exact access at each station as well. So telling you if there's an escalator, telling you if there's stairs, if there's level access, obviously, but just giving you a bit more of an insight into what's there. And I think even things like Google Street View can be really useful as well. When we're talking about taxis there a bit, I use Uber quite a bit. So I tend to use that rather than a black cab, just because I live slightly out of the centre. And I find that really good. Unfortunate because I don't need a wheelchair accessible Uber, though they do have them. They do have Uber WAV. Yeah, just being able to transfer into a regular Toyota Prius or whatever it would be is quite a good way of travelling as well.
Yeah, love that. Thanks, Andy. And for those that aren't in London, there's another really great app called City Mapper. That's really helpful for all things accessibility across multiple different modes of transport. So definitely one to check out and download on your phone as well. Glyn, I don't know if you have any others.
Got some advice. If you want to grab an accessible taxi, and Hackney Carriage Taxi, which is across the UK, then just Google your local authority and they've got a list of all the accessible taxis that you can catch in the area. That's providing you've got one, because not all areas have accessible taxis, but if you've got them in your area, all your information is there on your local authority website.
Free Now is fantastic. You do have your Comcab as well, but I think Free Now is my go-to when it comes to accessible taxis, because you can get a taxi within a few minutes, turns up at your house in no time or wherever you are.
Love that. Thanks for that, Lady Marie. And Victoria, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Actually, I think the ones that have been named are really good. I mean, we do actually have our own app, like a lot of the operators do. That way you can see where your bus is. You can actually see what facilities are on that bus, because, for example, on all of our newer buses, and I know it's happening thankfully with a lot of operators, we've got the 2 wheelchair bays now. And going back to the taxis, and what's been raised around accessible taxis, which is really vitally important, we actually have a taxi guarantee scheme that the driver should endeavour to do all they can to ensure, and that is the law, to ensure that the wheelchair bay is accessible. But if for any reason, in exceptional circumstances, that's not possible, it could be that there's a person with a buggy, and in the buggy there's a disabled child. There could be a reason that that buggy can't be folded in exceptional circumstances. We actually offer a taxi guarantee scheme for any wheelchair user that can't board the bus for any reason. And going back to Glyn's point around taxis, on sort of advice-wise, when we're booking a taxi through, it's about letting the company know if it's a manual taxi and a manual wheelchair and also an electric wheelchair, because in some areas some taxis only will carry manual wheelchairs. And what we found outside of London, there's a lot of accessible taxis in London, but outside of London, especially down in our area, it's not so actually having, as Glyn was raising about the queue, there should be a lot more accessible taxis. And we find it ourselves, especially around trying to book a taxi around school times and different things where they're booked up by local councils to be able to take people to and from school. Trying to get an accessible taxi between 7 o'clock in the morning and 9 o'clock in the morning and between 4 o'clock in the afternoon and 5:30 in the afternoon is very difficult, even for the small amount of accessible they are. So from a campaigning point of view, I applaud all the work that SIA are doing, because there needs to be more accessibility across all modes of transport. And so great. So thank you.
Love that. That's really helpful, Victoria. Thank you. And I suppose for me, there's a couple of others out there as well. Access Able is another resource online, which is brilliant. Glyn, you touched on it with taxis. You can look at your local authority, but also train operating companies. They'll also all have their own accessibility page. So well worth checking out. And we mentioned it previously, but just to mention it again, there are a lot of people on social media. I mean, it's just maybe following people, engaging with people and seeing what they do, and not being afraid sometimes to maybe ask them questions directly, or being a part of some of those networking groups, whether it's the SIA Community Hub or it's the SCI Owners Group on Facebook, amongst many others. There's loads of other ways to access other people's experiences, right?
Yeah, just to say that also, if a wheelchair user is traveling and they arrive at a train station that is not accessible, or the lift is broken down when you arrive there, the station staff will book you a taxi from that station to the next accessible station.
That's really, really valuable to know that they will support if it does go wrong. And I suppose moving on slightly from the advocacy and potentially the challenges that come about, I just wanted to end on something a little bit more upbeat, I suppose. And I'd love to hear from everyone around those places that you've been, that you've thought have been particularly accessible. Glyn, I'm going to come to you because you've already shared a story of somewhere that was maybe not so accessible in Prague with the cobbles that you obviously made work, but would love to hear of any cities or places that you visited that were especially accessible.
I've been to quite a lot of different places, but I guess outside of London, which we've already mentioned is really, really quite accessible, I would say Munich. Munich's quite an accessible area to go to. It's quite an accessible place.
Was that for Oktoberfest?
Yeah, everyone's got to do it. But no, I didn't go then. I just happened to be travelling through. That wasn't part of my road trip. It was highly accessible. It's actually reasonably quite smooth to get around as well. Drop curbs everywhere if you needed them. You got the English Garden in the middle, which has got nice walking areas to go all the way around. It's a beautiful city to go to. Definitely one everyone should put on their list.
Thanks for that, Glyn. Lady Marie.
Copenhagen in Denmark, really, really accessible. That was my 2 years post-injury. My first time going abroad, I went to Copenhagen, and that was 31 years ago, and it was very accessible. My first time going on a bus as well was in Copenhagen.
It's quite cobbly in Copenhagen as well, isn't it?
Yes, it is, but it's very, very doable, and everyone is so helpful.
Love that, and thanks for that one. And Andy, going to come to you.
I guess it's maybe more about the transport than the actual destination for this one, but I think the experience on the Eurostar is so good. And some of the high-speed trains in Europe connecting up with that has made travelling to Paris or Brussels, or I've done Amsterdam on the Eurostar, it's just such a good, comfortable experience. You've got lots of space, you've got access to an accessible toilet, you've got a comfortable chair to transfer onto and space for your wheelchair should you not wish to transfer. And I just think the whole experience of Eurostar and also those high-speed intercity trains in Europe. So, I did a trip between Florence and Rome. Both cities, have their challenges around access, but the actual transport there was fantastic. As well as in Spain as well, as I mentioned, there again, doing trips from Madrid to Malaga on the train and stuff like that. I've just been really impressed with the access on the train and how smooth those journeys have been to connect up those accessible cities.
Yeah, I've equally had some awesome experiences travelling by train in Europe and been really impressed by hidden ramps on trains that suddenly appear and drop down in the floor and things like that. They all happen to be working, which is great. And what you say about the Eurostar is so true. And I think it's an unknown gem, right? And actually the fact that you travel business class with you and one other passenger, it's extremely discounted rates, highly recommended for city breaks. And Victoria, lastly, but not least, just if you had any particular areas that you thought were good.
Yeah, for me, I'm not a wheelchair user, so I don't obviously have that lived experience of using a wheelchair whilst I'm travelling. But within my role, I can't help but look at all the access wherever I go. I'm checking out accessibility. So I agree with Andy. And of course, I lived in Spain as well. I think travelling up to Barcelona, down in Malaga as well, in Madrid. But also I found when I went to Verona, now, they've got quite a bit of cobbles, obviously, around the main square there, but they were very, very good at sharing information from getting to A to B, and they had a lot of picture information as well, which I thought was really good, and especially for the fact of some people that are visual, but also from the fact of view of the language barrier as well. So, yeah.
And that's great to hear, because obviously not everyone with a spinal cord injury has the need for a wheelchair. There are a lot of people that do walk with a spinal cord injury. So that's really great insight. And Glyn, I'm going to come to you next.
A lot of us, we've got experience now, been in chairs I've got the least experience, I guess, here at 8 years. Travel with confidence, you develop that skill. The little experiences you gain along the way is what gives you that sort of confidence for you to say, this is my destination, I've done my due diligence, I've Googled it, I've asked people in social media, I've checked out the apps, and you make that journey. If something goes wrong or there's a little hiccup along the way, you end up just making sure you ask someone for help, but you've got that confidence to do it at that point there. That's what you've got to instill on people that are newly injured is at the end of the day, anything can go wrong, but you just need to have that confidence to say, hello, I'm here, can you help? And help will arrive.
one of the other apps that I think is incredibly powerful in bringing independence and enabling you to travel is the Backup Wheelchair Skills app. Really great bit of information to build up that skill set to be able to get out and make the most of different places that you go to. And Glyn, you've perfectly segued me into my final question. And I'm going to come to you first. In one word or sentence, what does traveling with confidence mean to you?
Traveling with confidence means to me is getting base knowledge and leaving your house knowing that you definitely will get there.
Love that. Love that. And Lady Marie, what does it mean to you?
Travel with confidence means to me being able to get out of my house, travel to a station, just like any non-disabled person, getting on transport and going to where I want to go.
And what does it mean to you, Andy?
So I think travel with confidence, I think it's about opening up possibilities, so not having to worry about travel so that you can go on and live your life to your full potential.
Amazing. And Victoria, last but not least.
Oh, travelling with confidence for me is, again, it's being able to get to work, being able to get to my hospital appointments, being able to meet my friends and socialise, and actually, as everyone has already alluded to, getting out of the house and doing what I need to do and having the knowledge how to do it.
Amazing. And lastly, thank you so much to all of our guests for your time and the willingness to share your really, really valuable stories with us. Thank you to the listeners. And please, if you do have any questions that have arisen from here, there's loads of amazing resources that are on the SIA website. And I hope that you will all join us on the next podcast on this limited series of Travelling with Confidence with SIA. Thank you for listening to Access All Areas, SIA's travel and mobility podcast. If you'd like to find out more, click the link below and don't forget to follow us on social media. This podcast is made possible by funding from the Motability Foundation.